Today I want to discuss faith and its role in Buddhism, and in particular early Buddhism. I'm Doug Smith of the Online Dharma Institute, that's onlinedharma.org. If you're new to this channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to the channel. And click the bell down below if you want to receive notifications when I come out with new videos. Now, Buddhism is, depending on how we understand it, either a religion or a philosophy. I did an earlier video on that topic. I'll put a link to it down below. That's not going to be the topic of this video. But insofar as we consider Buddhism to be a religion, oftentimes that's described as being a faith tradition. Sometimes people gloss the word religion as faith tradition. So the question is, to what extent can we really describe Buddhism as a faith tradition? I'll get to that near the end, but in general what I would say is it's very complicated. It's not straightforward. It certainly isn't straightforward that it's accurate. But what we want to do, I think, is to look at what faith is, at least in the Western tradition where it's so central, to see what we can make of this concept of faith first, and then turn to Buddhism, and in particular early Buddhism, later on in the video. So that'll be the structure here. But before I do that, I just want to say one word about Patreon. So it's through Patreon that I try to support the work that I'm doing here. So if you're getting some use out of these videos, if you're finding them important to you or useful to you, consider checking out Patreon. I have a number of different benefits that you can get over there, such as early access to these videos and some behind-the-scenes videos, and a book group that we had a little while ago. We'll try to do another one soon. So there's a number of different things in case that interests you. So first, let's turn to faith, the idea, the concept of faith, which again, this is an English word which is coming out of a Western tradition. So what we want to do is to try to get some background here before we push this towards Buddhism, shall we say. So what is faith? Now, this is way too big a topic for me to deal with on a short video like this. This is a topic that you could spend a lifetime studying and finding out all the nuances, so obviously I can't go there. But we'll try to do something at least a little bit in a nutshell kind of introduction here. So within a sort of a biblical tradition, which is where really all of the idea of faith comes from in the West, we have faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. The assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Now, this is a cryptic sentence, and as such, it can be interpreted in many different ways. And throughout the centuries and millennia, it has been interpreted in different ways. So we have to be a little bit humble when coming at it because, again, there's going to be a lot that we're not going to be able to get into. But there are, at least on first glance, several issues. First, the assurance of things hoped for, that first phrase. We might wonder whether indeed we are assured of what we hope for. Much that we hope for, much that we want to come true, we know does not. We know ordinarily there's a lot in life that we want and which doesn't happen. So we might wonder to what extent it is skillful, shall we say, to feel assurance towards things that we hope for, when we know that in ordinary circumstances so much of such things don't actually come true. And then the second part of this sentence, the conviction of things not seen. And once again, we may wonder where this conviction would come from in the case that we don't see the thing. And this can indeed, and has in some Western traditions, led to something that we could term blind faith. That is to say, a belief in something without any reason or evidence in it. Simply belief, irrational if you like, or irrational, belief without reason. And again, this is one way to interpret it. And we may, again, wonder whether that is a very skillful way to approach reality, to approach the world. If we have conviction in something, ordinarily conviction such as that comes through seeing, comes through experience, personal experience of one kind or another. And if we lack such experience, if we don't actually see the thing, then the question is why we should have such conviction, or whether such conviction makes a lot of sense. Now, historically in the West, in Christianity in particular, there have been any number of different proposed solutions to these problems that I've raised with faith. And it's important to stress that a number of different approaches to Christianity do hold that that blind faith is not a good thing. In other words, that faith is grounded by certain kinds of evidence. We won't go into what that kind of evidence is, or whether it's the sort of evidence that we would necessarily accept if we were not Christian and so on. But nevertheless, at least there are various attempts within the Christian tradition to push back against this notion of blind faith, and to say and to agree that blind faith is a problem, and to say that really what is being held in ordinary Christianity is not blind faith. That sometimes does happen, and we have to acknowledge that, and not to simply assume that all such faith is blind. That said, even so, there is going to be a role for having confidence in things that we don't see ourselves, and we may wonder whether that's really a good kind of strategy to have. Such as that somebody arose from the dead 2,500 years ago. We didn't see that with our own eyes. However, it's also, and I'm going to make this more of a nuanced kind of issue here, because I think there are nuances that we're going to bring towards Buddhism eventually. There are nuances. That is to say that even nowadays, if we are, let's say, given a drug that is supposed to cure some illness of ours, we accept it with conviction oftentimes. But we did not see the experiments that went to making the drug. We didn't see the drug being manufactured and therefore know that it's manufactured to specifications. We certainly don't know the material behind it. And similarly, when we go in an airplane, we didn't see the airplane being made. We certainly were not with the mechanics when they determined that the airplane was airworthy. And yet we're putting our lives on the line in the sense that if this airplane doesn't work, if this drug doesn't work, we might very well die. So we're making a very, very large bet. We might even say a conviction without seeing. Conviction in things not seen. Now, one might say in response that although we didn't ourselves go to verify the construction of the drug that we're taking or the airplane that we're planning to fly on, that nevertheless we could. In principle, we could go there and do these things if we really wanted to. And that's true. The problem there, though, is that if we simply went as we are now and went to the factory or went with the mechanic, we would be in the same situation. That is to say, we wouldn't know what we were looking at. We would have to be told that this is the way things are supposed to look. And we would have to take that on conviction, without truly seeing. In other words, we wouldn't be doing it ourselves. We would be relying on the opinions of other people, which amounts to the same thing. Now, again, theoretically, we could go through school and get all the proper knowledge and then go and see for ourselves. Sure, that's all true. But there's too much of this in life. We can't do it about everything. We don't have the time. We would literally be dead before we would do this about one or two things in our lives. So, and especially given the amount of knowledge we have nowadays, for many things it would simply be impossible for us to have all of the knowledge necessary to be able to verify every step. So I think you probably can see where I'm going with this, which is that there is always going to be an element of taking things on conviction. Because we've seen them work before, because we've seen other things, we have some evidence. So I'm not going to say this is blind faith, it certainly isn't, but it is a conviction of things not seen. Simply because we don't have the ability to do all of the verification of everything ourselves. Nobody does. So what I hope to have shown is that faith is something somewhat complicated, that having conviction in things not seen is not straightforward. It's not straightforwardly, foolish because we have to do this. It can be foolish in certain circumstances and so on. But now let's turn to Buddhism. In Buddhism, in early Buddhism, which is what I'll be discussing here today, faith, there is no real notion of blind faith. We have to say that. There's never an idea that one should simply accept something either on somebody's just on hearsay, somebody's statement, or just without any reason or evidence at all. That never becomes an issue in Buddhism. That's not considered proper. The word that is often translated as faith, saddha is the Pali, is probably better understood as something more akin to confidence. That is, that we have confidence in something. A number of different Buddhist scholars have noted, in particular K.N. Jayatillak, who was a major scholar about epistemology, the study of what we know and don't know in early Buddhism, and Rupert Gethin, a contemporary scholar of early Buddhism. Both of them have noted that within the Western tradition that we've just been discussing, this kind of faith, or even we might say confidence, is ordinarily in beliefs or propositions, sentences, statements, what both of them call cognitive faith, or what Rupert Gethin calls cognitive faith, taking this idea from Jayatillak. That is, in the Western tradition, we're supposed to have sort of faith in beliefs, certain kind of beliefs. So you have faith that a particular thing is true, where we're saying a belief, such as that Jesus Christ died for our sins, or that Jesus is the Son of God, these kinds of things, that Jesus arose from the dead. These are the kinds of propositions, that is to say, sentences, beliefs, that we're supposed to have faith in. And both of these scholars also notice that in Buddhism, the case is actually slightly different. As Rupert Gethin says, in early Buddhism, faith is, he says, almost entirely affective. That is to say, it's not cognitive, it's affective. It's not about believing in propositions or sentences, statements, but rather about a certain kind of confidence, a certain kind of emotional state that we have. And in particular, it's confidence in particular people or individuals, things. In this case, in the case of early Buddhism, it is most typically confidence in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So we might say it's confidence in the Buddha, in the Buddha's person. Now, of course, this would have been most relevant back when the Buddha was actually alive, so people would have had confidence, saddha, faith in him as a teacher. That's less useful to us now because he isn't with us anymore, but there is certainly the Dharma, and there is the Sangha of monastics. So we can have confidence in them. That is, that these individuals, organizations, that they give us a kind of energy or impetus in our practice along the path. And so both of these scholars, Jayatillak and Gethin, make this out to be a relatively large and important distinction between, let's say, Buddhism and Christianity. My own sense is that this is actually less of a big distinction than they make it out to be, in the sense that, certainly within the context of Buddhism in general, and early Buddhism in particular, to have faith in the Buddha, or saddha, confidence in the Buddha, was basically, among other things, to be primed to believe what the Buddha said. So, for example, if the Buddha said that he witnessed his prior lives, an unbeginning stream of prior lives, that you took him at his word, that that was what he actually did see, and that he was right about it. And similar kinds of things about the action of karma and so on. And similarly, that one had confidence in the Sangha would have meant, and indeed in many cultures still does mean, that one accepts the word of monastics. That if monastics are teaching about the Dharma or about life, that one accepts what they have to say because one has this kind of confidence in the Sangha. Now, this is to say that while Jayatillak and Gethin make this distinction between cognitive faith, that is, faith in having a faith in a certain kind of belief, and affective faith, or confidence in a person or an organization, my point is that these things sort of run together. That as we have faith in people or organizations, what that really means, how that sort of cashes out, is that we often are supposed to then have confidence in what they say, and so we end up having confidence in beliefs just the same. And again, this does lead many traditional believers to therefore accept the notion of prior lifetimes because the Buddha said it, to accept the notion of active karma having led from lifetime to lifetime because, again, the Buddha said it. He said that he saw such a thing. And similar kinds of ideas. Now, this isn't necessarily blind faith. The idea here is that you accept these things on confidence given the amount of, let's say, wise teachings on other matters that we have been able to verify for ourselves. So it's not completely blind faith. It's perhaps a faith with some kind of reason. However, it's somewhere in between. It's not something that's clearly verified by ourselves because we haven't seen these with our own eyes. It is, to an extent, the conviction of things not seen, because we haven't, at least to my knowledge, most of us haven't seen or haven't even begun to see prior lifetimes for ourselves. Now, having said all that, the Buddha clearly did believe that seeing something for yourself was much more important than holding a belief in something based on faith or based on trust, confidence. Trust or confidence, saddha in early Buddhism, that was an impetus, gives us energy. It was a way of overcoming what's known as the hindrance of doubt, one of the 5 hindrances. I did an earlier video on the 5 hindrances. I'll put a link to that down below in case you're not familiar with that concept. But basically, in our practice, there are certain things that hinder us, that keep us from moving forward. And one typical hindrance, and I think we might understand why, is the hindrance of doubt. If we doubt what we're doing, if we're not sure about ourselves, then it's going to be difficult for us to progress. And certainly one way to counteract that kind of doubt is to foster inner confidence in what we're doing. And another word for this kind of inner confidence is saddha, or faith. In fact, they mean the same thing. It's just a different translation. So having that kind of confidence is necessary as we get started on our path, and indeed as we progress along it to quite some degree. However, from the Buddha's standpoint, that kind of confidence is not going to take us the whole way. It's not going to get us to the end goal. In order to get to the end goal, we're going to need to do the seeing for ourselves. Faith can take us so far, but it can't take us the whole way. While faith can give us the energy and confidence to proceed, it can't do the real deep work of insight by itself. The deep work of insight has to be done by direct seeing, by ourselves. We have to be able to see the way the world is, the changeable nature of reality, the selfless nature of all experience, the fact that all experience is unsatisfactory, these aspects of reality which indeed, if understood properly, can help free us. This can't be done on faith. Knowing these things cannot be done simply on confidence. We can't know them because someone's told us and we sort of agree to them. In order to do the work of insight, we have to see them for ourselves. And the fact that faith does not take us the whole way to the final goal, I take to mean that really Buddhism isn't a faith tradition in the same way that Christianity, let's say, might be described as that. In Buddhism, faith has a role to play. Again, we might say confidence. Confidence has a role to play in our practice, a central role, because without it we really wouldn't be able to proceed. But it's only a kind of a tool in our toolbox. It doesn't get us the whole way. Another place where we can see this particularly directly or clearly is in a sutta that's become famous in the contemporary world, which is known as the Sutta to the Kalamas. And I did an earlier video on that sutta, the Sutta to the Kalamas, where the Buddha discusses these very issues with people who are doubting and people who don't know how to proceed, a group of people who have seen so many teachers in their midst that they don't know who to believe. And I'll put a link to that video up on the screen. I would suggest taking a look at it to see the Buddha's, shall we say, positive message that goes above and beyond confidence. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope we'll catch you on the next one of these videos.